Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. This is part 2 of a show with Audrey Langolis. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now tell me, being an English person, how am I doing at pronouncing your name?
It's fine. I'm so used to people massacring it. Like,
Now, how do you say it?
well, in French, it's Langlois.
Right.
But I add a little like Langlois, like a little accent, because I know like I need to help people.
Right.
But I hear a lot of Langlois,
Right.
and it's fine.
You know, my Northland journal is printed in Sherbrooke, and I've had a working relationship with the owner, who's now my friend, and he'll come down to the house, and for his entertainment, and it's good-natured entertainment, he has me pronounce French names for him, and because he says, he jokes.
Yeah.
He says, not only do you English people not know how to say our names, he says, you have French families here who no longer know how to say their names.
Yeah.
In other words, they've anglicized them.
Well, that's why you have like people like Dubois. They just changed their name for Wood, right?
Yeah.
It was way easier. And then you have some people, and I don't have an example in my mind, but they just switch it a little bit the way it sounded in English.
Right.
So they changed how it was written, spelled out, just so it would make sense in English.
Right. You know, one name is that he laughs about is Poulin Lumber.
Yeah.
Now, that isn't how you would say
No.
it. And how would
Poulin.
you? Right.
Yeah. And sometimes I'll talk to my husband and he'll say something and a name of place. I'm like, what? I'll read it. I'll say, oh, no, this is a French word. You're not saying, I'm the one who's right. But even Roy, Roy is obviously an English way of saying roi, right? Like, so it's roi, it comes from king. The word roi for king. So sometimes, or Dago, it's Daigle. So those are families from Quebec that moved to Vermont, and
Right.
they,
And then-
yeah.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned the Dubois, like my
Yeah.
Dubois family, they changed their name to Woods because I guess Dubois means the woods.
Of woods, yeah.
Woods. And then my Seminole family, which was spelled Simoneau, back a few generations ago, they anglicized it to Simino to make it more anglified, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, no, it's very, very common. And it's a little bit of a headache when you work in genealogy because you have to like think and you're searching for a certain name and then suddenly it's not that name anymore. But then you're like, oh well, wait a second, it's probably the same person. You just changed your last name, and it was easier like to do back in the days for sure.
So when you were on the show last, we talked about you are originally from Quebec, and you have a love of history on both sides of the
Yes.
both sides of the border.
Yeah.
That's and we covered a lot of turf last time, but I didn't think we even came close because
Oh,
I
no.
think it's because of my love of history and your love of history. I think things went really fast.
Yes, and there's so much material and stories and we go back like both sides, like they go back, like like I said, like since like just going since the college when in the history of hockey, at the beginning of hockey, they would play on oh my God, I'm forgetting the name. The lake with Derby Academy. They would
Right.
play on top of the lake, and it was not even called hockey.
Right.
And then when Newport would come to Stansted, I have newspapers like, newspapers of the school of Stansted saying, oh, here comes the Yankees. The Yankees are coming with their flags and, their procession. And it was a big deal, but that's so, I find it so cool to see, like that perspective and the way it was
And as I've told you in the past, is like you were interested in the hockey thing, is
Yeah.
Charles Adams, the founder of the Boston Bruins, the man who brought the NHL to this
Yeah.
country, was from Newport Town
Yeah.
during the 18.
Yeah, and we have a Patrick brother that came to Stanford College, and after he graduated, him and his brother went to play in Vancouver. And they are the Patrick brothers of the fame. I don't know if you know a lot about history of hockey. One of them became a coach for the New York Rangers, and they're the one who created a lot of the rules that made hockey what it is today. With adding the net, adding the board, and then allowing people to pass backwards, which you were not allowed
Right.
at first. You could just go forward a little. So they created those rules that ended up, making hockey what it is today. So
Now I had a person from Quebec on my radio show in recent weeks. He was famous from the days of my youth, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. Is the Vashaw
yes,
fan.
well, a little bit. So I knew his brother.
Mad Dog?
Yes, by name, just a little bit. I knew he was a wrestler. I'm a little bit. I'm gonna say a little bit too young. Like I know my dad probably knew it, like
Right.
grew up with him. So we had a couple of famous wrestler back in his days. So I know them by name. You know them by name, but that's it.
Yeah, my guest was, I believe he's probably the last of the Vashaw wrestling dynasty. I might be wrong. Is Paul the Butcher Vashaw, and that was kind of like a throwback to my youth because
Yeah.
back then I think wrestling was more common because there was less to do, and but these guys are like when I posted photos of them, it was like everybody.
Yes.
Like
Well, wrestling was a big thing in Quebec. This is a time, it goes back to days that maybe not everybody had a TV, so that was a very cheap entertainment. And Quebec also has a very strong history with strong men. Just like Louis Cyr, like the man that could lift 300 pounds with one hand. So it kind of like, once that died down and the idea of the circus died down, it kind of wrestling took over for a very long period of time. So
yeah, the much beloved now past Micheline Auger, she was the lady who cleaned the streets of Newport. She was recognized as super senior. She'd been injured in a motorcycle accident in the 1960s. She was a sister of the famed Quebec, the famed French Auger trio. They were high wire trapeze artists who
Okay.
traveled all over southern Canada and northeastern United States. So our link here with the French is undeniable.
yes, and you had towns that were created by French Canadians or not necessarily like French anymore. Even in New Hampshire, you have a couple that their history comes from those immigrants from Quebec, and I think it's like roughly, like 70 years of massive immigration. Or immigration from Quebec to the States. Never from the States to Quebec, but yes, you had a lot. So it did shape, obviously, Vermont and Maine and New Hampshire, and because this is where mostly they established themselves.
Right. Then the thing is, my Canadian friends, like in Stansted and such, or even higher up, remind me that not all Quebecers are actually French.
Yeah.
They were some people who they've been there English, like Robin Smith of the Caledonia Record. She has, until recently, until the border laws changed, she decided to finally, after living in the States here for 30 or 40 years, being a dual citizen, she has moved back, but they were not a French
Yeah.
family. They were
Well,
an English family.
the Eastern Township was formed by loyalists.
Right.
So when I said it's never the Americans coming to Quebec, it's kind of not true. But it happened a lot earlier than that. But yeah, it's the Eastern Township it came to Quebec, and they obviously did not want to live amongst French. French and English at the time were not on good speaking terms. So the government gave them what became the Eastern Township. So all the towns along the border, all the founding families were not French, and it took a very long time for French people to come to the Eastern Townships.
I'm not quite certain, and maybe it'd be a question that you'd be able to eventually help me with, is my wife's family is Curtis, and
Yes.
I believe they come from, they have roots, ties to Stansted, and I believe probably the library that is there, the Curtis.
Well, you have the museum is the
Okay.
Colby Museum.
Right. Okay. And so I'm not exactly sure how they ended up settling in that region. So I'm not really familiar with it, but they eventually moved over here.
It well, you know that back in the days of the border was very fluid, right? So from Rock Island to Derby Line, it was not for a lot of for many years, many decades. It was not a big move. I know a lot of farmers moved to the States because there was not any land left for people. The way they would work the land, like when you're a farmer, you have to like now like they farm every like 3 years or they rotate.
Right.
They learn that you have to give like the soil a year off or something like that. They didn't know that back then, so their land was producing less and less and less. And then you had this idea that you had to divide your land to all your children. So the land was becoming shorter, it was not producing enough. So then people were not making it. And when you were a farmer, you didn't have a lot of education usually. So a lot of farmers left for the United States because of that, for the idea, the promise of finding a job in the factories in the States, or finding work as a farmer in the States, because the option was that or moving to Montreal, usually.
I've interviewed back years ago. They're farmers who are now gone. Is they also said, while our depression was really bad, it didn't compare to they said they thought the Canadian depression was actually worse. So they said coming here, even during tough times, was a lot easier here. But I'm not familiar with the Canadian depression, so.
Well, it obviously was a rough one. Our economy, I'm so like the economy of Canada, the Canadian economy was very tied to the economy of the United States, right? So as soon as the United States shut down the border, said we cannot buy your stuff, we cannot sell your stuff because we have to take care of ourselves, the economy of Canada tanked as well. And we were in shambles. So I don't know. I have a friend actually who has a doctorate in economic history. Like he would be able to tell me, like to compare both and say who got it worse. But I also know that during the Depression, this is when the United States started putting some laws in to accept less people, because before that it was like, yes, come, no problem, and you could just take a train and then move. And during the Depression, this is when they started to put a stop to that because they didn't want more people.
Right. I know back when one of the fellas I interviewed was Agnes Limoges, and he was a farmer back during the Depression, probably pre-Depression even. on the river road, and he listed off all the farmers along the river road, including just one I remember is Boudreaux, and they were along the whole river road in North Troy. It was just all French families that lined it. Now, one thing I think about our history, you helped us out a bit, those of us who like a beer now and then, is during Prohibition, when the United States decided it wanted to ban alcohol, you folks were really helpful. Is you really ramped up your alcohol production, and it's true. I understand even you actually built some of your roads on the profits that was generated by the alcohol trade, which really did ramp up during Prohibition, because there was so much that was being shipped, because people came from, like, if you were from Orleans County, Vermont, or probably Vermont in general, if you wanted to drink, it wasn't any big deal. It was easier. But during Prohibition, we had big city people, including gangsters and such, coming from urban centers, whether it be Hartford, Connecticut, Boston, Mass, New York, and they were all coming through here. This was, if you go through the old newspapers of the 1920s and early 30s, this was one hopping place, and it involved it involved murder, for the sake of alcohol.
Yeah, you have stories of people crossing the border or going to those line houses, but we also had kind of our prohibition too. I mean, Stansted was a dry city for a very long time. Like, you had to vote. It was an election, and yes, it was dry for a very long time. And at one point, it's the Del Monte. That push to have a drinking license, and even like the trustees of Sansa College wrote letters because they were afraid alcohol would tarnish the youth, and the kids would sneak out and go drink at the Del Monte. And
well, that probably did tarnish the youth, because I'll tell you, I wasn't a big Del Bar person, or the official name Del Monte, just because I was early to bed, early to rise. And they didn't open till like maybe 9 o'clock or something. Didn't seem like, or at least the music didn't begin. But I suspect a fair number of, I expect a fair number of young people, all the way from the probably 50s up until the 80s at least, had their first taste of alcohol at the Del Bar, because it used to be said if you could see over the bar, you could get served.
But was it also like was there a bar right on the border where like the border patrols are, like the Canadian border? Wasn't there like a bar?
Well, there
or a place, because I think my husband was telling me, because obviously our drinking age is 18, so even my husband is like almost 40, was saying that they used to go to that like that place near the border.
I'd have to think about that. But during Prohibition, there were bars that were actually, some of them were on the border. They weren't built for that purpose. They were built for other purposes, but when Prohibition came, they transformed them into bars, because technically you could drink on the Canadian side, but you couldn't drink on the American side. I don't know how that was enforced. But, let's bring it forward a little bit. Though, what impact do you think 9/11 and the years since then had on border life?
Well, obviously, I can only, I go from what people are saying too, right? Because I came after 9/11, but just looking, and obviously, I think that what's happening right now was gonna have a lasting impact. I think, it used to be called the Three Villages, right? Like Stansted, Rock Island, Derby Line. It was almost just one town. And 9/11 kind of destroyed that. People used to just go back and forth and cross the border and just say, even like recently I was in an auction, and some of the Canadian people were saying that back in the days you could just drive and say hey, and
Yep.
like to the
True sto-
custom board like officer, and he would say hey, how are you, and that was it, you know.
True story. That's true.
So that changed, obviously. So I think the proximity, this sense of conviviality is a little bit gone, and it's a little bit sad. I think it really kill this idea. Like we're used to like World War I celebration, World War II celebration. I read there was a parade that started in BB and would end up at Derby Line, and then there would be a giant Labor Day celebration for both sides of the border, and who's the most beautiful baby. But it was Derby Line and like BB and Rock Island that were included.
And I think another thing that has come into play that people don't take into consideration about our ties aren't so strong anymore between the countries. I, I look at my own family. I remember going to visit my Canadian relatives when I was growing up, but as that generation died off, uh, the trips over there slowly it trickled down
Yeah.
to nothing. So I think the further we get away from the influx of the Canadians here in the 1920s and 30s, I think now that those generations have either died off or they're dying off, I think our cross-border
Yeah.
relationships have probably suffered a
Yeah,
bit.
and I see that when I look at genealogy. I see people born in Stansted died in, like Derby, or the vice versa, right? Because people used to move
Right.
back and forth. So families for a very long time had ties either side. Um, I know that this hurt the economy of Stansted because, like, Stansted, like Rock Island, there used to be a lot of businesses, right?
Right.
And a lot of them died down because they lost revenues by having less people come. Now they're working on changing that. Like the theater in Rock Island has been closed for decades, and they're now going to reopen it. So we'll see what's going to happen with that. But it's definitely impacting the economy on both sides. I mean, right now I'm pretty sure. Well, I was reading about it, like that people can see the impact of it on their businesses, the fact that the border is closed. So I think our economies were linked with one another, and
Right. Well, Derby Line was once a very vibrant community, and I suspect it's really been hit hard by the border closure because there used to be a lot of people going through there, not anymore.
yeah. But even like I think the article in the newspaper recently was even talking about the Northeast trails.
Northeast Kingdom Trail,
Yes.
the bike
That they're like
down in Burke.
they're seeing a huge difference in numbers, and farmers that used to sell their produce are not selling that because it was all tourists or Canadians coming and renting, like B&Bs, and so hopefully it's not gonna last long. I too want that because I want to be able to see my parents more easily. But we still had a lot of ties, and we still do. And it's during times like this that we see it. Like even people on this side would like to visit their family on the other side, and they can. So that's sad.
I've actually been contacted by media from around the world who are spotlighting that divide now that has been created.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, even though I might occasionally show up on some of the, whether it be the History Channel or German television, more often than not, I'm not the one, somebody will contact me, and my role more is to find somebody who fits
Yeah.
the role, and I'll guarantee you right now, you'll be getting Next time I get a contact, because very often they'll come to me and want me to do a segment
Yeah.
on the history of the border. Well, I think it's going to be great to have you join me, because you bring you bring an interconnective.
Yeah.
Uh,
And and I remember like so I had to wait a year before I could move here and live here. So I was married with my husband, but going through the whole visa process. So I could only come during weekend to visit him. So I live in Stansted. We were married, couldn't live, and I didn't have my residency. So I just can imagine if what's happening right now had happened, like during that time, we would not have been able to see each other for maybe, like a year or whatever. So when borders are closed like that, they don't think, well, they cannot imagine our situation, right? And sometimes you call on the phone and you talk to someone at the the Canadian government, and they don't understand that I live in the States, but I work in Canada because it's 15 minutes away. I live 15 minutes from work, but it's two different countries. And sometimes it works, and sometimes I lose just for that 15 minutes. So
I have a nephew who is experiencing what you could have experienced. They were in the middle of doing because they'd gotten married, but he hasn't seen his wife in months because the process isn't complete. So I suspect they've been together.
yeah, and it takes a long time in regular, it took longer even like than normal, and we were in regular times. So I cannot imagine right now how long it would be. But yeah, it's tough. Like it's a tough process. Yes.
Well, we have to pretty much wrap up.
Oh, already.
It's been a great experience, but I also before we get done here, I want to give you. Well, they're 5 out of 6 of my books. One book, my first book, Rum Runners and Revenuers: Prohibition in Vermont, are out of print. But you have J. Peak, Voices from the Mountain, the history of J. Peak, When Salmon Was King, Voices from the Clyde River, and Newport Centennial, which I'm sure you'll find interesting, Voices from the Lakeside Community, and even a small book about the Derby Port Drive-In, and Booze in the Kingdom, Voices from Prohibition. My next book is coming out, I think, later this year. It'll be another Newport one, but
Thank you.
These are yours for all the good work you are doing.
Thank you so much.
All right, well, any final words?
Just, if people have not joined the group yet, do and share your pictures.
Northeast Kingdom Roots.
Northeast Kingdom Roots, and share your stories, your pictures. Don't be shy.
Right. Okay, thank you for coming on. I've got to say this has been an outstanding show, and first time we'll be meeting, and I suspect the next time I have a national or international media outlet looking for somebody to talk about the history of the region, you'll be joining me, if that's okay with you. Okay, thank you for coming on, and we'll have to have you back on again.
Perfect.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.